episode number 52.
When I had my near-death experiences, I didn't exit consciousness. I entered consciousness of a different form.
The last 5 days of my mom's life, we'd have Ringo jump onto the bed, and he would nestle to her, and I know she could feel him. We'd actually place her hand on his fur.
You know, you learn about cultures and you learn about people, and especially talking to the older generation, you learn about what it was like for them 60, 70 years ago, and that's just an eye-opening experience that I don't know where I would have found that if I wasn't in the milk truck.
Why didn't Yoko step in and say this isn't what he wanted?
Well, she did it.
She's the one who had him cremated.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Oh, Yoko.
Yeah, I'm not going to leave to anything. I'm going to stay as vague as possible.
Okay,
so.
good. Let me know if you hear a drone over your house.
Hi, this is Brant Huddleston, host of Dance Past Sunset, the show where we explore innovative ways older adults enjoy peak life experiences well into and even past their sunset years. In my last show, I talked with Andrew Belser, who is presently a professor of movement, voice, and acting at Penn State University. Andrew is also the creator of an award-winning video program called FaceAge that shows young and older adults interacting knee to knee, nose to nose almost, while studying and describing one another's faces. It is a deeply moving work that challenges perceptions about what it means to be old, fosters introspection, and builds acceptance, awareness, and cross-generational connections. I had the chance to experience FaceAge earlier this year, and it quite frankly moved me to tears. In part one of my talk with Andrew, we heard him tell us what FaceAge is and about its power to affect perceptions. In this next part of our interview, which you are about to hear, Andrew tells us more about the neuroscience behind FaceAge and a little bit about his personal story and how an encounter with his older uncle on a rooftop changed his life. So please join me for part two of my interview with Andrew Belser of FaceAge.
Tell us a little bit more about you and kind of your journey getting to where you are. And, you know, as Steve Jobs famously said, you can't connect the dots moving forward, you can only connect them looking backwards. So looking backwards, connect the dots for us.
So I grew up on a farm in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And
I've been there.
Yeah.
Beautiful country.
It's a beautiful town to grow up in. I actually grew up on the outskirts of town. My family...
Could you smell the chocolate?
We could actually smell the chocolate, particularly when thunderstorms were coming. It became dense in the air, the smell. And my family on both sides are Pennsylvania Dutch farmers, basically. And they all lived to be well into their 90s, and many lived past 100. And it was nothing for me to go home with a great aunt or uncle or a grandma and grandpa on either side of my family and stay with them, work with them. My grandfather on my mother's side worked at an Agway store, which is a feed sort of mill kind of place. And I guess the reason I bring this up is that in farm life, connecting across generations is just a way of life.
Yeah.
You're vital, you're working together. And it's a really embodied way of life, by which I mean the memories that I have growing up are in my body very much.
Tell me about that. What does that mean?
So I have memory. I'll give you a couple of examples. One time I was with my Uncle Harvey painting the roof of his barn. Uncle Harvey was probably 85, maybe 87 at that point.
And up on the roof.
And up on the roof. So we were painting a tin roof. And, you know, it didn't occur to me to say to Uncle Harvey, well, actually, it might have occurred to me at 12 or 13 on the roof, to say, are you sure you should be up here? But he got dizzy. And I remember holding him so he wouldn't fall off the roof.
Wow.
I remember him sort of slumping into me. We were kind of standing there, and he just came over, and his forehead was all sweaty. And And I just remember the feeling of how vibrant that man's body still was, how much will, how much intention there still was there. I'll give you another story. My grandpa Belser, which is my father's father, he was a tinsmith. I don't even think tinsmiths are around anymore. They would put tin roofs on barns and chicken houses and so forth, and they would fashion gutters out of tin to go on the same. One day, I went out with him to, I think it was an Amish or a Mennonite farm, and he was working all day trying to paint up some roof and some gutters and install some gutters. And he worked so hard with tools that his hands on the way home clamped around the steering wheel. Like they literally cramped up. And Grandpa might have been 60s by that point, early 60s. Mm-hmm. And I remember laughing with him and prying his hands off the steering wheel.
Wow.
Like they were literally cramped. But the actual feeling I had was, again, this is a vibrant person with working hands.
So those are both very visceral experiences. In the one case, holding your uncle's body, feeling his muscles, feeling, having him slump into you, and in the other, holding the hands of the working hands, the strong hands, the cramped hands of your grandfather. You know, there's a lot of, when you say you felt things in your body, is that because there was some kind of transfer of energy or life force from skin to skin? What was going on there?
Sure. Yeah, we could use that language. It doesn't really, I mean, that's the way we actually learn things. Like, and FaceAge is really built around this.
I can see that. I can see the connection now. Yeah. It just is clear as day, because there was nothing between the two of you. No plastic, no glass, no electrons, just skin to skin, man to man, or man to boy. Yeah, beautiful.
Exactly. And there's some kind of, I don't know, language doesn't maybe do it justice, but there's some kind of wisdom that I have in me around what aging is, because I was around a vibrant kind of aging. Now, I gave you two examples of men, but I could give you many examples of women in my life too, in the same way, but it was always in a kind of teaching, mentoring way. I do a lot of reading into anthropology and sociology, and there's a beautiful book called Wisdom Sits in Places by Keith Basso. He talks a lot about how the Apache Nation transfers a lot of information through images or going to places. FaceAge is not an idea of transferring from generation to generation. It's trying to set up an embodied, visceral, and immersive experience for people. That's on the screens, and then we transfer that into training, and we can talk about that a little more.
I do want to dig into the neuroscience a little bit, because first of all, I'm curious to know how you went from farmland of Pennsylvania Dutch country to being a professor of movement, voice, and acting in North Carolina, and then back to Pennsylvania, and then when the science started coming in, because I would think of a professor of acting as more of an artist, and clearly you are an artist, or you wouldn't have been able to make FaceAge as beautiful as it is. So there's a lot of art, there's a lot of right brain work going into FaceAge, but there's also a lot of left brain work. Tell me about that. Where did it come from? How'd you get there, and how's it affecting the work?
So, okay, this is a topic that has really been important to me throughout my life, because as I was growing up, I couldn't figure out in high school or even college, let's say, what I was exactly. I mean, I was clearly pretty smart, but I got 200 points higher on my math And when I took aptitude tests, they all leaned towards science, like be a doctor or something.
And what year did you graduate high school?
1978.
78, okay.
And so I was born in 1960. So I really have always felt like an outlier in both the art world because I've always been interested in interdisciplinary work and science. Always. This is not a recent thing.
But were you also in drama?
Oh, yeah. I played the violin. I was in the theater. So, I came to understand a little bit more about myself through some good writing. One was, I think somewhere in my 20s, I picked up Mary Catherine Bateson's book called Composing a Life. And it's really fundamentally about 5 different women who are very much, one is a college president who's also a dancer, and one is a chemist who's also a poet or something like that. So it was very much about a lot of gifted people figuring out that they were good at a lot of different things. Maybe they didn't have to choose one, but maybe there's room in the culture for art science and scientists who are also philosophers and so forth. So I was always drawn. I remember taking beach vacations or mountain hiking vacations, and people would say, "Oh, you're taking some scripts along with you," because for 35 years I was a theater director.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say, "No, that feels like work to me." And I would always take books on psychology or neuroscience, which in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, it was really emerging. I mean, it's been a hot topic for the last 40 years. We've come to know a whole lot more about the human nervous system. So I'll tell you, 12 years ago, so I was a theater director in a theater company. I've had, taught lots of theater studio work, lots and lots of different kinds of training. And 12 years ago, my father died. He died rather suddenly. Now, he had stage 4 colon cancer, which he only lasted from diagnosis to his death about 2 months.
Wow.
And I spent a tremendous amount of time with him during that time. I happened to be opening a brand new theater, directing a show, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and opening a brand new theater, and then I would rush home at, sort of emergency calls from my mother to be by his bedside because we, of course, didn't know when he was going to pass.
Wow.
And I watched him struggle at the end of his life with what I would call he was not fulfilled, and he didn't know what to make of that, and there was no way in his remaining days he could work out the things that were troubling him. It was a complicated life and a complicated death. And something dawned on me, again in an embodied way, during the next couple of years after that. It's possible. I remember having this in my tape loop in my head. You can get to the end of your life and not have done what you need to do.
Well, I think that's a pretty common feeling. I should have walked, barefoot more and not worked so much. I mean, that's very, very common.
But the gift of my father's death was that there in my mid-40s, I got to experience that vicariously through him.
I see.
And that may seem, I don't know if it seems sort of mean to say, I got to experience an unfulfilled life. Yeah. But in a way, he passed on to me the
gift.
Knowledge.
Yeah.
A gift that I needed to take up practices that were really fulfilling to me. So, cut to the chase. How did I get to FaceAge and interdisciplinary work? I started to realize that I didn't want to spend my entire working life in theater, and I really directly sought out art contexts where I could work between the arts and sciences. FaceAge was not the first one. I did some work with the National Science Foundation grant on bringing Marcellus Shale gas drilling, information about the science of that. I worked with geophysicists to bring stories through theater to the hills of Pennsylvania communities to help teach them about the science of this gas drilling that was happening all around them. Mm-hmm. And I did a project with the National Institute, funded by the National Institute of Health, called I Look Out for Child Abuse, which is films that help train people who work with children in child care.
How to recognize the signs.
How to recognize it.
Yeah.
And then also how to what does it mean to actually report it? Because it's very complicated. Mm-hmm. So FaceAge is in that vein. I was at the University of North Carolina. I went into a science lab that was both working with gerontology and computer science, digitally aging young people's faces, and I found the work immensely fascinating. And because that intensity of that lab linked up with my life history of feeling like I'd never understood why crossing over generations, intergenerational relationships weren't more featured in culture. Because of, as I said, I grew up around them. And, every once in a while an artist you'll sort of wake up with a song in your head or a poem in your head. I woke up, not literally perhaps, but it felt like this. I kind of knew what to do with this work. I said, I'm going to film people very close, face to face, and give them an opportunity to study aging and youth close up. And maybe we can change the perceptions of aging.
Wow. Well, I want to learn a little. I want to get your perspective a little bit more on what you have learned from the younger people featured in FaceAge. But before I go there, I want to ask you some personal questions about your own aging. You said you were 58. Have you aged your own face?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And how?
Well, I think it's because I grew up around aging.
It didn't freak you out.
It didn't freak me out at all.
Yeah.
My wife, we've been married 25 years. My wife has always said about me, you've just been sort of an old soul your whole life. And I think, by which I think she sometimes means I've been kind of that maybe I have always been in relationship with aging my whole life. And so, seeing myself as older feels a little closer to me than it might to someone who maybe doesn't experience aging.
Now I have a confession to make, which I don't. I hope this doesn't offend any of my listeners, but I still cannot look at older people and not think that they're not as beautiful as young people. I have a youth infatuation, and I suspect it has a lot to do with being a boomer, having grown up with the Beatles. They were young, they were beautiful, they were the hippies came along, they were beautiful and young and dancing with flowers in their hair, and it was an exciting time to be a young person. I felt like we were making a difference in the world. I really drank the Kool-Aid that gave me a youth infatuation. And middle age and old age has not settled with me nearly as well. And I said, half jokingly that I'm still 30 inside, but I am. I'm not happy looking at my own body getting old, the sagging skin, the losing my shape, and things that my eyesight has gone to hell. There's so many things that I am just really, really not happy about. And to me, growing old is not beautiful. I somewhat take objection to the title of the president of the AARP. Her book is called Disrupting Aging. I'm like, no, you don't disrupt it. It doesn't disrupt. You don't stop it. It comes like comes like a juggernaut. It just keeps coming and coming and coming. And things start failing. And if you're caring for a really old person like my mom, you really see that. So You know, being an old soul and having had the experiences that you have, either as a child or more recently with FaceAge, does it change the way you think about growing old? Have you found yourself able to look at older people and see beauty, or do you feel more like I do?
Mm-hmm. No, as you were talking, I thought, I have, I think, developed a sense of curiosity around aging, and this might sound, I don't know how it'll sound, but I feel like there's even the question of failure is really only a way of framing what happens to us as we age, because there are, of course, other things that happen that are intensely wonderful. One is that we settle down. Our nervous systems settle down.
Mm.
We tend, this is some of the work in gerontology, we tend to focus on positive things as we get older. Now, not everyone, but
this is
generally,
true. Yeah.
We tend to focus on positive things. We see what life is about. And so when I see aging in others, and when I work with the people who are above the age of 65 or 75 or 85 in filming them or 95, I really do find the whole, let me just use a science way of framing it, the whole organism of that person to be fascinating and beautiful. There's a whole person there. And that's what I begin to see.
It's reminding me a lot of the dynamic you hear in that Cat Stevens song, Father and Son. Do you remember that one?
Mm-hmm. Sure. That's my era.
Yeah. That the father is settled down and he's wanting his son to settle down, but his son is on a tear, As an artist, someone who's been in theater for decades, how do you square that then? How do you settle with settling down? Do you feel like it takes the edge off of art? I mean, could you create the kind of adventurous, daring, explosive, controversial art as a settled down person that you can as a young person with their hair on fire? What's your thoughts on that? I think the answer's got to be no.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, look, when you're young and you have a certain kind of, I'm talking about 20s, 30s, when I had a certain kind of obsession about the new work I was creating in the theater, and I often created a lot of new work. And I think a little bit of that, even in my 50s, I wouldn't say I'm quite as obsessed, but what comes in is maturity. And also, a sense of, increased capacity to make art. It's just I'm more skillful.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I could have made FaceAge. I don't think I would have conceived of the model at 25.
Yeah, so maybe it's just it would be an interesting FaceAge exercise to see how art changes, music, film. How does art subtly transform as a person grows old? How does when the fire goes out and the settling in settles in, how does it transform the way you express yourself artistically? It'd be interesting. I'm reminded of an interview I heard years ago by the lead singer for The Who, Roger Daltrey, who's famous for his onstage antics. And he was like, I can't do it anymore. I'm 60 now. I don't have the energy. Right. Makes you wonder how Mick Jagger keeps going. But yeah, It's interesting. Well, well, I do want to ask about folks who want to see FaceAge. Of course, the best way is to see it in person with the 3 screens, which is the way I saw it, which was immersive and so moving. What's the next best way to see it? Can they watch anything online, or what would you recommend?
Sure. We have some clips of it at www.faceage.org. I guess you don't really need to say www. anymore.
Nobody says that. You're showing your age, Andrew.
I'm showing my
Nobody
age.
says that anymore.
Faceage.org. And at faceage.org, there are some clips of films, and we're about to make some new films. One in China, one in Pennsylvania on aging in the work life.
Why the one in China? What's going on there?
Well, so
besides them taking over the world, but other than that, what's going on there?
A long-term vision for FaceAge is to change perceptions of aging. That's a mission that we have, is to see if we can be actively engaged in changing perceptions of aging and ageism. And so as a part of doing that, we're filming in new cultures. It's new to us that have different perceptions of aging. And China just is I wouldn't have necessarily said, oh, let's go to China, because of course there's a language barrier and all kinds of things. But there's we installed the project at the World Congress of Aging last year, a big event in San Francisco at the Moscone Center. And a lot of people from around the world saw it there. And a company that has a large presence in senior living facilities in China is now working with us, collaborating on making new films there. We would like to make some in Ghana and or Senegal, and some in Europe, somewhere in Europe. Of course, it's a lot of different places. And we'd like to make ones. We're working with some people in Canada, looking at First Nations of Canada. So looking at some older cultures, some cultures where some of the older practices in the culture survive. And intergenerational connection is, of course, one of those in Native American and First Nations of Canada. So if people want to see it on faceage.org, there's also a schedule, there's a calendar. We will be installing it for the public at the Pennsylvania Convention Center in late October at the National Meeting of Leading Age. Leading Age is a partner.
Yeah, Leading Age is headquartered here in D.C. Yeah, I know those guys.
Yeah.
They do good work.
So they're partnering and they're helping us to disseminate it.
Excellent.
Essentially, we're going to have regional tours of the United States. We're training about 25 trainers to talk about to get our training that follows the film. So we haven't talked much about this today, but these films are used as a platform to begin conversation with people. So we go into workforce settings, caregiving settings, community settings of all sorts, where we work with people who have experience in conflict mediation and conflict transformation. So we're doing a lot of training.
Wow. So
settings.
So then FaceAge, the film production, really is just the start of the conversation.
That's right. It sparks people beginning to engage with each other across difference, I would say, often across age, of course. But we're increasingly asked into situations. So, for example, I'm giving it being used in medical training, and in one large medical college, they're bringing me into their HR department at their medical center, where they're having FaceAge being used as diversity training, essentially. How to talk across difference.
Beautiful.
So it's used in a lot of different contexts. So people might be able to see it when we bring it to their community. Just if they just keep their eyes on our website,
okay,
they'll see
faceage.org. Now, not to fall into my own trap and put groups of people into boxes, but I do want to ask about millennials, and I want to ask you to kind of tease apart the box, because we've got a lot going on today on campuses where there are angry millennials that are they're really social justice warriors who I think appear, at least to me as a 62-year-old, to have some anger towards my generation. And then, of course, there are others who don't, and everything in between. So as you have engaged and entered into these conversations, what are you finding with millennials in all of their different shapes, sizes, nuances, and opinions? What are you learning from them?
Well, I know what you mean by the passion, but that's not where I would start with the differences in the lifespan differences between people who are, say, 80 and people who are, say, 20 right now. Where I would start, the defining difference for me has to do with technology. And the way technology, I mean, it's certainly among the very top defining characteristics. So,
as in a digital divide, some get it and some don't.
Sure.
Or what do you mean?
Sure,
by it?
but so I'm almost 58 in a month, and you're 62.
61 and a half, Andrew. 61.
Sorry, there you go.
It'll be 62 in July.
I'll be 58 in July.
We'll have a birthday party.
We'll have a birthday party. So when you and I were growing up, we wrote if we were wanting to communicate with somebody, we dropped coins into a payphone, or we wrote them a letter.
Yeah.
And today, just to give one really simple example of this, my sons, who are 18 and 20, have girlfriends, and they text constantly. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not a Luddite about technology, but there is absolutely a shaping, a learning going on in the nervous system of a person who has grown up with that intense experience with technology. There's a lot of research going on about how technology is shaping attention, distraction, anxiety, depression. And it has to do with things like delayed gratification, ability to focus on one thing without needing distraction. If I talk to my sons and say, how about what would happen, and I have said this, what would happen if we went on a vacation and you weren't able to use your cell phone, and it drives them crazy to think about it. Because their nervous systems are wired in. That is very different in people who are often a little bit older than us. They just don't, it's not the way we grew up.
I just want to clarify what I think you're saying. It's not that their nervous systems are different. It's how their nervous systems are being affected by the technology.
That's right.
So the younger person is interacting with the technology a lot more, and thus their nervous system is being affected a lot more.
That's right. That's right. As a species, we don't evolve in 60 years.
Right.
Significantly.
Yeah.
You and I have the same essential nervous systems as young people today. But if you and I had been given cell phones, basically walk around with a computer and put our face in it, a lot of the day, we also would have been hacked into. Our nervous systems would have been essentially hacked into as well. So I don't see it as a bad. I don't put baggage. I would say that if you and I had a cell phone at 18, we also would have taken up that sensory environment and learned it in a very different way than you and I learned.
Yeah.
And for young people, it's just a different experience. It's a very wired, technology-driven. Yeah. So listen, we're all wired to gather information. That's, as humans, we need information to exist. But what sort of information do we need? How much is overload? How much is just simply distraction?
Well, I'm not going to be so kind to technology. I have found that my level of depression goes up as it's in direct correlation with my level of social media involvement. So when I was on Facebook every day, all the time, checking, whether people like my articles or something, I was finding, and then also engaging in, discussions with people, I was getting more and more depressed. And I finally couldn't figure it out because I'm not by nature a depressed person. So I was like, what's going on with you, Brent? And finally I said, I think it's Facebook. I think it's not having that thing that the Native Americans learned and put in the book Wisdom Sits in Places, Susan Pinker's book, The Village Effect. I'm sure you've heard of it.
Right, sure.
Where, you just can't substitute face-to-face, knee-to-knee, eyeball to eyeball, skin to skin, human interaction with what's happening over a piece of plastic and glass. No, it's not a substitute, and I don't see it ever being a substitute. So I'm a bit of a Luddite in that regard. I'm thinking of a neuroscientist who also happened to be a marriage counselor. I remember when my first marriage was coming apart, and I was trying to figure out what was going on. And this guy said that 95% of marriage conflicts could be solved if you would just sit knee to knee and eyeball to eyeball and look into each other's faces, because the fast nervous system is the one that's interacting there, and you're looking into the face of your beloved and seeing friend, not foe. I'm a friend.
So
I'm a friend. I may have hard things to say to you, but I'm a friend.
That's right. So if you take that notion, I think that's exactly right, and very wise counseling that you got.
It was too late, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, never too late. But if you take that notion that human interaction, socialization in close proximity to each other is an important feature ongoing in the human race, like we cannot grow up, we cannot literally bring our nervous systems online in a healthy way without close eye-to-eye contact with our mothers.
Yeah.
And we can't do it in any kinds of relationships. We need that as humans. We need that intimacy of all sorts. So if you take that and you translate that to FaceAge, or you just take that notion, that is the essence of FaceAge. And it's not just like, oh, that's wonderful. It's also scary and awkward and impactful and compassionate and all kinds of things.
Do you think that your sons get it, or their friends, their contemporaries?
Yeah, they get it.
Do they?
The thing is, here's the thing about this generation of kids. They're incredibly smart. They're open to learning. They're capable of learning. And
do you think
it's not that? Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think that they're getting it, that their devices are a barrier to the very kind of human-to-human interaction you were just talking about, or that Susan Pinker talked about? And that one of the reasons we've got so much rancor and bitterness and meanness online is that people aren't talking to each other. Forget about sitting knee to knee. They're not even using the smartphone as a phone. They're doing everything through text. How can you have how can you solve problems with a girlfriend via text?
Well, somewhat two different questions there, but let me deal with the first one. Do I think my kids, my son's age and my sons get it? Yeah, but it's different. Like, I can intellectually get that 10 o'clock at night is not, when I'm having a craving, is not the best time to go to the pantry and eat chips.
Yeah.
Potato chips. But that doesn't mean that my nervous system gets that, because I've wired it to sort of eat at that time. In the same way, I think my sons go, I might be a little bit hooked on this. And a lot of kids probably do this. But they actually need a way through that. It's not about, ideas are only part of the learning. You have to actually experience something that your nervous system will then take up and say, oh, you know what? I need some of this. Go on without any. And then maybe you find more balance with technology. It's not this or that. It's a sense of balance.
Do you sense that the tide is turning? I know, a couple of years ago there were some public relations campaigns where they were like, turn off your phone, and if you want your sex life to improve, put your phone away. And I don't know if they turned the tide or not.
I have this notion that years from now, we're going to look back in this age when we first quickly came upon all of this technology and think it's quaint, and think, oh, do you remember back in the late 1900s and early 2000s when everybody thought like computer technology was the thing? I actually think as a species, we will evolve to understand that we're missing something. That it's not all in the technology that we've created, that there's a human-to-human transaction that is vital, and that is, I think, that is connected with place and thought, generations. I think it's a key to our survival, actually. So in some ways, when I see, sometimes I think we're full of technology talks right now, TED Talks and so forth, that suggest that we're headed off into artificial intelligence and all kinds of things. I'm very different than that. I don't think the computer is ever going to replace the human. I don't think artificial intelligence is close to somehow replacing human consciousness. It's not to say that robots won't do some things, but I actually think we could very well begin to realize what we're missing and just realize the amazing, complicated, beautifully complex nature of human-to-human interaction.
Well, I keep a candle in the window, which is why, in hope of that, which is why I latched on to FaceAge as powerfully as I did, that I do believe that a lot of the rancor that I see in our country today is partly the fault of the fact that we're hiding behind our computers, and that some of the things that we say online we would never say over a cup of coffee. Never, never, never. And there needs to be more getting together, breaking bread, sitting around the campfire, so to speak, and talking with each other, the way we did in the old days,
Sure, and my idealized version of that has to do with breaking bread, sitting across from each other, sitting in proximity with each other across generations.
Yes, exactly.
And what I'm saying is our villages, our communities need to be designed to bring us into proximity with each other. That's all. We'll figure out the rest. We'll figure out that we're interesting. We don't actually need to be told that.
Well,
we just need to be
That gets into a fascinating area that we don't have time to go into now, which is the whole notion of placemaking and creating environments where people like to hang out. You know, I frequently will go to a coffee shop. It's an old building, and you know, I have to take the metro to get there, but I go there because it's always bustling. There's just it's always full of people, and I may not say a word to any one of them, but I'm shoulder to shoulder with the person next to me, and I just soak in that human energy and warmth, and I absolutely love it. I would perish without it. I would. So, well, Andrew, great work. Any closing thoughts or comments? I mean, there's so much more we could talk about, and we may have to come back and have a second session. As it is, I think I may have to break this one into two. But it's just great work that you're doing. Any closing thoughts or comments that you have about FaceAge or the future thereof?
No, well, I would just say that FaceAge is in a significant growth spurt right now, where we're bringing it to we're bringing the installation and the trainings to a lot of different markets and a lot of different communities, settings.
Now, will it
healthcare training
replicate itself? In other words, is there one FaceAge that I have to find somewhere in the country, or will there be more than one that I can...
No, there'll be more than one, yeah. There are currently 2 or 3, but there'll be about 10 of them moving around.
It's kind of like the Blue Man Group, you know, I can...
yeah, exactly.
But there's only one Andrew Belser, and I got to meet you.
Yeah, and there's only one Brant Huddleston, and I got to meet you.
Well, that's true. For better or for worse, there's only one. Well, what a pleasure. And I'm an immense fan, and I am going to track your success, and as I have done, brag about you everywhere I can and let people know about the good work that you're doing, which I think is just it's just so good on so many different levels, Andrew. Well done. Good job.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. And thanks for having me on today.
My pleasure.
I encourage all of you to experience FaceAge in person if you can. And if you are interested in having FaceAge to your city, check out the show notes for a way to contact Greg Wolf, the former CEO of Humana, who coordinates FaceAge exhibitions. Greg is a great guy, and he can tell you all about how FaceAge is more than just a video program, but also includes training for organizations that want to do more to promote intergenerational connections. It's a good thing, methinks. Coming up next on the show is an expert on Social Security, if and how it might work the way it's supposed to, and if it'll be there for you when you need it. It's all part of my campaign to shine a light on ways we boomers can enjoy peak life experiences well into and even beyond our sunset years. You won't want to miss it. Please drop by on Facebook to say hello. Just type Dance Past Sunset into the search bar to find me. I post a number of articles there on issues I find interesting, all related to boomers and their aging parents. Some I write, like my recent one on the anatomy of loneliness, a big deal among folks of all ages. You would do me a great favor by liking the show on iTunes. You'll find directions for how to do that on my website, dancepastsunset.com, plus an invitation to get my free newsletter, where I occasionally hand out free stuff. Yes, free is good. Just look for the big orange button. That's it for now, my Tweedledees and Dums. Remember to make the most of every moment, because it's the only moment you've got. Until next time, this is your host, Brant Huddleston, signing off. Space.